Burwellbeing with Sally Lander.
Hello, I'm Sally Lander, a yoga teacher living and working in Burwell. Welcome to Burwellbeing. Over the next few weeks and months, I'm going to interview some of Burwell's many fabulous health and well-being providers, and I'm so excited to welcome someone really central to Burwell's well-being. Today, I'm interviewing Vivien Honeyborne-Martins, the founder of Burwellness, Burwell's very own wellness centre, which presently offers Reiki, Bowen technique, clinical hypnotherapy and psychotherapy, as well as Vivien's work as a chiropodist and podiatrist. Vivien is a Cambridge University graduate who taught science and maths for a while before finding her true calling in podiatry. Her podiatry practice is stepwise foot care, and it honestly seems to me that she provides every treatment you could need, from everyday chiropody, biomechanical assessment where she'd look at the way you walk and run, and orthotic therapy to support your feet and reduce pain. Vivien has been a marathon runner herself, so she has an exceptional and personal knowledge and insight into every aspect of your feet, ankles and legs. She treats children as well as adults, and people travel to her practice from far and wide, including Norfolk, Hertfordshire, Essex, Suffolk, and even Italy. Vivien, I love the names of your businesses, Stepwise Foot Care and Burwellness. I've kind of adopted your approach by calling this programme Burwellbeing. I'm talking from North Street, Burwell, in my home office, otherwise known as the spare bedroom. Where are you, Vivien?
I'm down at South Perrott near Crewkerne in North Dorset, helping out my friends Richard and Mary, who've just bought this place, very overgrown. And we've been clearing amazing overgrown wisteria and mainly wisteria like you never have seen in your life.
Oh, wow, I thought you were on holiday when you told me you were off to Dorset, but you were helping somebody out.
Well, I love this sort of holiday. In the past, I've gone on estate working parties at Lee Abbey and Scargill House. They're both Christian conference centres. But obviously, since the lockdown, and also since I've had a hip problem, I'm not really up to doing that. But here, we're all slightly on a par, and my help is greatly appreciated, and we can all stop if we need to.
Oh, that's so lovely. Well, thank you so much for telling me about that. I guess I should begin with my first question, which I know you have an answer to this. What would you say that you love about Burwell?
This is the first village that we've lived in. We've now been there since 1994, where everybody, both people in the shops and the neighbours, were immediately very friendly, because we actually started our married life in Waterbeach, and you had to be there for about 2 or 3 generations before some of the old ones would accept you. So I was utterly struck by how extremely friendly everybody was. And the other thing about it is, although it's a big village, and in fact the longest clunch village in the country, it still has a very village atmosphere. I live in North Street as you do, and as you'll know, the conservation areas are very, very old and traditional. So I think that's quite wonderful old historic houses.
Yes, I so agree. We only moved here 2 years ago, and we just felt so welcome so quickly. And we did look at houses in Waterbeach. So we're very lucky that we landed up here instead of there. I wondered if you wanted to tell us any more about your relationship with Burwell. And I'm particularly interested to hear about the story of establishing the Burwellness building, because that was happening just as I was moving to Burwell, and I was following it on the Burwell Community Facebook page.
Well, as I said, we've been here since 1994, and at that time I was actually teaching. I was teaching at Comberton Village College, in fact, and I didn't actually change to practicing podiatry until 2004, although I'd started to conceive the idea it would be a good idea and started to undertake some training. So it was a checkered career of teaching, and therefore not really involved that much with village life for the first 10 years. I wasn't attending the church regularly either, but in 2004 I started a podiatry training with the Institute of Chiropodists and Podiatrists. to achieve a lower level qualification, which wasn't then regulated by the Health Profession Council, because they were just bringing in regulation at that point. But it didn't stop me launching successfully. It was all home visits to start with. And then we had a little tiny room at the back of 21 High Street, the old Hill Farm, for those that remember when Ken Driver had it. So I did begin to see people, but it took a long time to build up. And so I fairly soon realised that I really ought to do a full-time degree. I was still doing some teaching, and in the end I financed going away and doing a full-time degree at Northampton by doing some podiatry treatments at the weekend and teaching private tuition in the evenings, actually at Northampton, and also the weekends back at home. So that was, I don't know if I could do that now, but it was wonderful. So having completed my podiatry degree in 2008, it started to be really difficult financially. We all remember the crash. And so I really had to spread the net rather wider and look for other places, other clinics I could go and do a day or two at as well. And that's how I started working at Toft and also at St Ives, Complementary Health, which no longer exists. And that was when I also started attending a church, but the church immediately introduced me to a great many more people. So, and then I joined the PCC and met up with a number of Christian friends. So all of that has fed into it. And I did start working from home, first of all at 21 High Street, then at 7 Swaffham Road, where I had something fitted out properly. But the reason why I changed to the Burwellness was because I hope not to work beyond 75, and I would like to be able to sell what's a very thriving practice, to pass it on to somebody else, hopefully somebody already working there. And the only way you can sell a business is if it is in commercial premises. And so I have a podiatrist friend, and she said, well, we could start a therapy centre. So that notion was her idea.
Oh, I admire you so much looking ahead like that. So many of the people that I know, including myself, we tend to go from one day to the next, let alone, looking all the way ahead. Did you say you're hoping to retire by 75?
Well, having been in the Territorial Army, I think rather along Army lines, and my notion was that if I started podiatry on 1st of January 2004, I would aim to do 22 years like you would if you were in the Army. Well, at least you would if you were an NCO, and that would take me neatly to the end of 2025, and that would be when I'd be 75. So that struck me as a nice round solution.
That's fantastic.
I realised that I would need to get commercial premises, so I didn't buy it. It belongs to Mitchum's. It is, in fact, the old telephone exchange, but it's on the Mitchum's site. And so I leased the building. I was, one of my patients was actually Maggie Mitchum and, the senior Michael Mitchum, sadly no longer with us. And they heard that I was looking for something, and they actually offered me a series of 3 different buildings over time, and we tried to work out what would be suitable. It took quite a while to get it sorted, but in the end they offered the old telephone exchange, which was becoming available, and it was ideal, not too big, visible, good parking, being opposite the petrol station, very easy to guide people to it, and so that was ideal.
Yes, that's a great location, isn't it? As you were saying, Burwell is such a long village. If you can get premises right in the middle, you're really flying, just to start with. And as you say, being near the garage and the co-op there, that's perfect.
Near a bus stop, I do have people, the occasional person come by bus.
So you were a teacher, and then you've been in the Territorial Army. Is that... I don't know, it almost sounds rude. Is that a hobby more than a job, Vivien?
Oh, yes. Territorial Army is. Actually, when I went to Cambridge, went to Girton to do chemical engineering, and I found that I hadn't got the head for the fluid mechanics or the maths of it. And in any case, while I was there, I was in the Christian Union, and so many of my friends were medics and, of course, doing medicine. I began to feel that what I was wanting to do was somehow rather bleak, and it ceased to inspire me in a way. And I was I knew I'd have to teach probably, but I felt even then that I wondered whether I could be led in the direction of something medical. And I knew that the teaching would not be my life's work, but it's very convenient when you've got children. I actually did some research, first of all, with what was then Cambridge Consultants Limited. I did a year with them, and then I wanted to try and do a PhD. So I actually did start that with the engineering department at Cambridge, but it was any supervisor worth their salt would have recognised that the project didn't have a proper research question. It was just fracture properties of carbon fibre reinforced composites, and it wasn't capable of producing anything useful. So I did 3 years but didn't get a PhD, and I got fed up at that point and went to drive taxis instead. It's amazing how many people do, in fact, drive taxis. All the best people have a go at that, and it does bring you into contact with everybody. My husband had a go as well. But just to show the contrast and what a good training it was for getting on with everybody, I had at one end of the scale Mr. Rhodes, or Right Honourable Rhodes James, MP for Cambridge, and at the other end of the scale, it was the outpatient full-born. The learning disability people going for what they used to call the full-born industries. But I happily chatted with all, so that was brilliant.
How wonderful. And
then I did start to get some teaching. I mean, I'd had children by that time, so I was looking for getting into teaching. But so I did piecework for a jewellery company in order to pay to send my children to a nursery so that I could go and be a lab assistant at Long Road Sixth Form College in the physics department. So that kind of took me into the teaching environment, and I then started to get a little bit of private tuition, and in due course I did manage to get teaching posts. So it was rather a circuitous way in, but when I got into the classroom, Castle Manor Upper School in Haverhill, actually, I found that actually I did love it.
But you seem to be a person who's very passionate about what you do in your life, and you're always looking for the thing that is right for you. And also it seems like you really like to help other people. Do you think that's what has led you into what you've ended up doing now?
100%. Even as a child, I loved stories about people that were in services of one sort or another, that were willing to sacrifice themselves, and that's in a way what the trouble was, that the careers for women in the army were very boring in the early days, so that didn't appear to be a good way to go in. It's probably how I came to be a Christian as well, because I needed a leader, and I just found that Jesus was. So that was when somebody told me that just worked for me and has done since. So you just pray you'll be shown what to do, and then you can throw yourself into it.
That's absolutely wonderful. From that high point, I think that Burwellness seemed to be pretty well established, and then lockdown came. And what was that like for that kind of customer business? How did it affect you?
It caused me an 80% drop immediately in the number of patients, because everybody thought they'd do what they were told, and they all cancelled their appointments, and except one or two people who were a bit sort of hardline and also really, really wanted to have their feet done. Quite shortly, my governing body, the College of Podiatry, started sending round information telling us exactly who we could and could not see. So 23rd of March, we had the announcement. People were cancelling straight away after that. And I had a few people that did want to see me. And then after that, I had lots of people that wanted to see me, but I wasn't allowed to see them because I was only permitted to see people at certain fairly high-risk categories. The aim being to reduce the footfall and therefore minimise the cross-infection risk. So my income, the turnover for the business went from around sort of 10 to 11,000 per month. It had been that in February. March, we lost the last week of it, so that was down. April, down to 2,000, so there's the 80% drop. By May, I was able to let people know I could see people who had painful corns and various specific conditions, so it doubled. And then all of a sudden, 1st of June, we were allowed to see everybody, and so it was no holds barred, incredibly busy.
And that's the situation now, isn't it? Because I know this is why we're trying to do this conversation while you're away, because you were saying as soon as you get back, you were just going to be working dawn till dusk again.
That's exactly right, yes. This is not only because of the demand of me specifically, but because 3 other podiatrists in the area have ceased to work, not in fact for COVID reasons, but as it happens, they have, plus a clinic in Ely. And so there are a great many orphans patients about who desperately need somebody.
Oh, Vivien, that's such a wonderful way to describe them. Because you are so attached, aren't you, to the people who help you, to your therapists. And,
yes.
And you do feel just terribly alone if those people you depend on suddenly disappear. So you're coping with a new client. Is that a lot more work than coping with an existing client?
A great deal more. We have to do so much in the way of initial assessment and an enormous amount of paperwork. So if I'm just doing a straightforward chiropody appointment, then it's very simple. It's a half-hour appointment. The writing of it up is very standard. And then I'm on to the next one, and I will see up to 12 a day, on occasion 14. But if you have a new patient and you see them for an hour anyway, there's at least an hour further writing up and sorting out in the background. So it's a huge amount more effort. And yet I've had endless new patients, not just my old ones coming back, but a great many new ones recently, which I'm obviously delighted to see. Part of it is because children are off school for about 6 months, and when they get back to school, they seem to develop all sorts of foot problems related to suddenly doing a lot of games and so on. And my real passion is the orthotics, because what I do is life-changing, and I'm hoping to be launching my own design and brand of orthotics in due course, because what is taught and what is practiced misses the point somehow. So it doesn't have to be very different, but I'm utterly devoted to that because it's completely life-changing for people.
Can you explain? I mean, I think I know what it is, Vivien, but can you explain, in case I'm wrong and in case anybody else listening doesn't know?
It's really very simple. We evolved to walk barefoot on yielding textured surfaces such as soil and grass. And instead of that, we find ourselves walking on hard, flat surfaces, and that can include inside our shoes. The consequence of not having not creating a footprint, not being on the softer surfaces, is that only part of the foot actually touches anything and receives any sensory stimulation from the surface. You see that if you walk with a wet foot on the bathroom floor, very evident. Quite a proportion of the foot doesn't actually touch anything. Now, there is a muscle that's intended to control the arch in your calf, and its tendon travels down under the inner ankle, splits into 6 pieces and attaches to the undersides of all the bones in the arch of the foot. It simply does not get stimulated. You see it perfectly plainly when you video people, and the lack of the stimulation of that muscle, and therefore the lack of the control of our arches, means that all of us, all the time, in those circumstances, are operating our foot in an inefficient fashion. And with people with very flexible feet, it has one effect. On people with a very rigid foot, it has another effect. But this is simply not taught at all, and almost all orthotics that are designed are fail to have those characteristics. Ridiculously, a company that does know that's producing the right thing anyway is Crocs. The inside of a Croc, while not all that yielding, actually pretty well fits with what nature intended our feet to be in.
Good heavens, that was absolutely revelatory to me. So I did not, but so I thought that orthotics were to support the foot, to kind of fit into the arch and almost hold it rigid, but that sounds like I'm completely wrong.
Yes, you and most of the orthotic designers. What it's intended to do is to touch the arch, give it a degree of support. Certainly, when you put your foot down, if you were walking barefoot on grass, as you put your weight on the foot, the arch drops a little bit, bringing it into firmer contact with what should be touching it. And the stimulation from that should trigger tibialis posterior muscle in the calf to actually operate and control the arch. And when your foot first goes down and the arch drops, the foot becomes flexible. And what should happen as the arch rises again is the foot then actually becomes rigid, so that it becomes a rigid lever and you can push off when your foot is behind you. heel comes up. You need that foot not to be flexible, but to be rigid. And it never is. It just never is. I work with a lot of young footballers who find their feet get very tired and achy. Sometimes they come with very little calf muscle definition. And after they've had some orthotics that I've done, in not very long, you start to see calf muscle developing. And of course, they can corner and accelerate and everything so much better because suddenly they can actually put force through the foot.
I'm completely enchanted by that, Vivien. I can't tell you how glad I am we're having this conversation, because as a yoga teacher, I know just how important feet are, and we do a lot of work on feet and we talk about them a lot. And I've been very suspicious of the idea of a rigid infill into the foot, that would appear to prevent the foot from doing what it needs to do. And your work is exactly the opposite. That's really magical.
It is. It's really important the arch should be allowed to drop a little bit in order to create that transition between being flexible, which it needs to be when it first goes down, and becoming rigid so that you can exert force through it. And the simple simile I always tell patients is if you are rowing a boat and the blades of the oar were made of jelly, you would not be able to exert any force. In fact, you'd probably catch a crab. As you pull on the oars, the blade would simply deform. And that's exactly how our feet are most of the time.
That's just fantastic. Gosh. Okay, well, so maybe moving on from that, you've already mentioned some of your clients and, footballer, for instance, a young footballer. Do you have another particular favourite client story or two that you could tell us?
I think that every one of them that have really made me feel happy, that it all has been the orthotics ones. And actually, one that comes to mind, funnily enough, I had two ladies, both of whom had had quite a lot of surgery on a right foot. And when they came to me, both of them, that right foot was leaning right inwards. In one case, one of the tendons had more or less parted. And with the aid of orthotics, which do provide clearly some support. For somebody like that, where the tendon's gone, you need to provide rather more support. But returning the foot to a more correct position has resulted in her looking completely transformed and now being able to go for walks again, having had a good deal of surgery of various sorts. So apart from my dear footballers, that would probably be my best patient.
Oh, again, that's such a fantastic story, because I quite often come across people who've had surgery, in my opinion, a little too quickly without really finding out what the resultant life is likely to be, and have gone from one kind of disability before the operation to another kind afterwards.
Exactly right. The other thing is that people think that a bunion operation will solve something.
Oh.
Well, the bunion developed because of this forefoot instability that I'm talking about. And so if you can correct it, and it will go back again if you don't solve the problem by actually then putting in some appropriate orthotics, which the ones I would design will have a degree of flexibility beyond what is normal, and also textured top surface. But I had bunion surgery in 2008, and my foot has been perfect ever since, not remotely attempted to go back, because I have always worn orthotics, suitable ones.
Yes, you know the biomechanics of it. Wow.
Yes.
Oh, well, this is really I am so glad we're doing this, Vivien. This is absolutely magic. I suppose we should also talk about the other sides of your work, which are so important to people, the everyday chiropody, as you call it.
Yes, I'm hoping gradually not to do that, quite simply because I've now got arthritis in both my thumb joints, and because honestly anybody can do a good chiropody service. In fact, my dear colleague Jacqueline Cross is a better chiropodist and a more thorough one than I am. Sadly, she doesn't intend to work more than a couple of years, but and I would like to take on somebody else I won't ever stop doing chiropody for my existing patients, because if you spend half an hour of time with people when you can have a jolly good chat, and you do that every 6 weeks or thereabouts, you do get to know people well. But I really need to devote myself to this orthotic work, to developing these orthotics, and indeed to doing the necessary research that would bring it to public attention. In order for a new design of orthotics to be accepted, you really do need to actually do some proper research, which gets published in peer-reviewed magazines. And I certainly need to do that. I certainly need to do some proper research. So there's one more piece of equipment that I need to buy, which will be some very sophisticated three-dimensional gait analysis equipment, because you need to have objective and not just subjective results in order to prove something. It's not sufficient for somebody to say, oh, I'm more comfortable. You actually have to be able to be able to measure something and to demonstrate in an objective fashion the difference that your orthotics are making. So that is why I really need more time. I would like to be working only 2 or 3 days a week and devote a great deal more time to the research in order to, say, bring my design to more public attention.
Yes. So, I mean, it's fair to say you're still on the lookout then for colleagues to support the rest of your work.
I am. I am going to be. We've considered looking into the new concept of a podiatry assistant, which would be trained by the College of Podiatry, the same as I was. Or at least, sorry, that is the professional body, but they would supervise the training of such a person, and would very much like to find somebody else qualified as I am, but with a good deal younger, who would be prepared to actually take on the practice and buy it out ultimately. So yeah, certainly I'm looking for more podiatrists.
Good. Oh, well, if anybody's listening and knows of anyone who needs a home, Vivien has a home for you already, and a great future as well. So, I mean, I think we're coming towards the end now, Vivien, and I wanted to ask, what is the best way for people to find out what you and Burwellness, as I mentioned at the beginning, you do have other therapists working there. What's the best way for people to find you?
If they're another therapist, then the thing to do is to look at the burwellness.co.uk website. A little bit sketchy, but it gives you the necessaries to get in touch and the room hire rates. For anybody who is a podiatrist, well, then you should really be looking on the stepwisefootcare.co.uk website, and that's also the best place to find out about me. If you don't find out by hearing about me from somebody else, and that seems to be the way most people do.
Yes, it's a great website, though. I did learn a lot from it, although not nearly as much as I've learned talking to you today. And then the final thing I wanted to ask you was, based on all this incredible expertise, if someone isn't coming to you, can you give them a tip for maintaining their health and well-being? Can you give us a tip?
Well, in general, the thing that maintains health and well-being is actually activity, and that's of every sort. So for anybody that isn't actually capable of physical activity, it should most certainly be mental activity of challenging types. But for most of us, obviously, we want to maintain activity itself, being physically active. And since feet are the foundation, it's fundamental for your feet to be in as good order as they possibly can be, both from the point of view of alignment and also the point of view of energy, doing what you do without wasting excessive energy. Your feet need to be in the right environment, and it doesn't follow at all that so-called good shoes will achieve that. Shoe design, people think in terms of the horizontal, two-dimensional judgment about whether shoes fit or not. But actually, you need to think in 3 dimensions. You need to be thinking in terms of the height of the shoe and also of the footbed itself. I never feel really I can recommend anybody else just because I believe that I've seen something that others haven't seen. And that sounds ridiculous, but I think that I've got an insight that isn't taught. So very important to start young as well. I sometimes get people where the deformities and so on have become rather fixed. I had a child of 22 months the other day, and it's because the parents were concerned about the way he was walking. They'd been told by the medics that it was fine, he'd grow out of it. Well, he jolly well wouldn't. He was in-toeing and his big toes were pointing inwards. I'm so thankful I met that family at that age, because that's the best time to start foot health and foot education. So yes, it is looking after your feet, and at least speak to me.
Vivien, thank you. Well, you've such a wealth of knowledge.
I've done parachuting, I've had a go at gliding, rock climbing, winter climbing, caving, and I mean the potholing as well. So I do love my adventures.
That's absolutely wonderful. You are a total inspiration, Vivien. And Burwell is very, very lucky to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Burwellbeing.
Thank you very much.
Burwellbeing with Sally Lander.